Hi, listeners. As we approach the end of the year, please consider giving Psych Sessions a tax-deductible donation. With a one-time or monthly donation, you can make a difference in the lives of educators all over the world by supporting the programming that Psych Sessions continues to develop and release for free. Increasing the longevity of Psych Sessions means more historical interviews, more diverse voices, more news series, and more teaching resources. And by supporting Psych Sessions, you join a community of passionate individuals who believe in the transformational value of psychological education. So, help us make this holiday season one to remember. Please visit bit.ly/Psych Sessions Donate to make your tax-deductible donation today. That's bit.ly/Psych Sessions Donate, all one word, all lowercase, or head to psychsessions.org and hit the donate button. Thanks for being a part of Psych Sessions and for making a difference in psychology education all over the world. Happy holidays.
But there was one kind of universal thing that everybody really hated. And I remember when interviewing people, you could almost see venom dripping, kind of thing. And it was that Distinguished Service Award, which they hated. This is an award for, going above and beyond, doing something really special. And it came with an extra little check. And I said, it didn't pop up as a reward issue. It popped up as a fairness issue. They all felt this went to the wrong people. The system was rigged. The people who really deserved recognition weren't getting that award. And the people who didn't really do any special work, but maybe had the favor of the boss or, were the leader of the team, but not the team that did the work. I mean, there was 50 ways this thing was unfair.
You just heard Christina Maslach, Professor Emerita from the University of California, Berkeley in Berkeley, California. Garth and guest host Jane Halonen from the University of West Florida interviewed Christina as part of the West Coast swing of Psych Sessions 2023 East Coast Tour for episode 188 of Psych Sessions, Conversations about Teaching and Stuff.
Psych Sessions is proud to partner with Macmillan Learning. At Macmillan Learning Psychology, content matters, and these days, digital content matters more than ever. Macmillan Learning's Achieve elevates interactive teaching and learning with an extraordinary range of online course content in a powerful yet easy-to-use platform. Interactive ebooks, innovative assessments, engaging videos and activities, helpful instructor resources. Achieve brings it all together and makes it easy for you to find what you need and what you want. See for yourself. Go to macmillanlearning.com/Psych Sessions for an introductory tour today. Macmillan's Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning. The Psych Sessions podcast is sponsored by STP. That is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2. You can find them at teachpsych.org. The views or product endorsements expressed do not represent the views, support, or endorsements of STP. Psych Sessions is so grateful to have STP as a long-term supporter. We've all seen the research. Retrieval practice increases student performance. But that doesn't mean that taking quizzes is popular among students. At W.W. Norton, they think assessment can be fun. So if you and your students are tired of those same old multiple choice questions, mix it up with Inquisitive, W.W. Norton's award-winning adaptive assessment. Created by a cognitive psychologist, Inquisitive utilizes gaming principles and interactive question types to engage students with more active than static multiple choice questions. Students wager points on each question, utilizing strategies of prediction for metacognitive monitoring. With the ability to control their grade by how many questions they answer, almost all students continue working until they have earned a grade they're satisfied with, thus rewarding effort and fostering a growth mindset. Want to see what your students think of Inquisitive? For Psych Sessions listeners new to Inquisitive, you can try it for free the next time you teach. Just go to siegel.wwnorton.com/Psych Sessions. That's Siegel, like the bird, SEAGULL.wwnorton.com/Psych Sessions. And the folks at WW Norton will even integrate it into your LMS for you. Hi, folks. It's Garth. I am here today with Christina Maslach, renowned researcher on job burnout. And I am here once again with my great friend, Jane Halonen. Jane, welcome back. You were just talking about, you guys were chatting that you've known each other for a while now. Do you remember where you met?
Ooh, where we met? I think we met when I saw her give what turned out for me to be a life-changing lecture. And I think it was WPA, maybe in Phoenix. I can't remember exactly where, but I made a point to talk with her after the talk because something was so profound in the talk that it changed my life.
Wow.
Well, I want to hear more on that story. Christina, welcome. I know you've done a lot of these, especially because of your new book that's just come out. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. But yeah, you have been on our list for Psych Sessions. You've been on my personal hit list for a long time, ever since Jane mentioned her connection with you. And I really dug into your research. And so I'm just really excited to have you here. How is the podcast? How are the podcast interviews going for your book?
They're going well in general, I think. And it's been interesting because there's such a difference in terms of questions people ask or how they run the podcast. And, you know, you come out of some of them saying, wow, that was the most fun. I really enjoyed that. Great questions, etc. And others thinking, this was like the playlist that they got from somebody else and they just went through it. And it was, you know, it wasn't particularly, I hope it was useful. I hope it was helpful, but you sort of feel like you're just doing the same old. And when I asked somebody about it once with the questions, and she said, well, we have to start from the beginning and ask you all the basic questions. And, you know, and it's kind of like, have you not read any of this before so that you have come up with the questions you'd like to know, you know, some answers to, rather than what you could read in the book or the articles or something.
You know, I've noticed this about people like yourself who've done like a lot of research on a single topic, that many times in interviews, there are just talking points and the author, researcher, kind of goes through the talking points. And I think to myself, that's got to be so boring for them to do that over and over and over again. But no, I appreciate that. I hope that we can dig into some really exciting application today with regards to job burnout. Jane, what was, do you remember what Christina said that first time you heard her give a lecture that kind of changed things for you?
I do. She was talking about burnout, and in particular, she stressed the point that if at some level your values don't match the values of the institution or the organization that you're working with, you will never be happy. And for me, that was the moment where things clicked into place about why I was feeling so restless after 17 years at the place where I began my teaching career. That ultimately, as grateful as I was for the launch that I had from that place, ultimately we departed on a fundamental value of individualism versus collectivism. I was far more individualistic and was never really going to be completely satisfied. It's like, of course, it isn't, there's nothing wrong with the organization, but the fact is the fit, even after all that time, wasn't so good. And it was just the clarity with which she said that made me go, I think it's time to change ponds. And I did.
Christina, does that sound like something you would have said?
Yeah, it would have. And it's interesting because when people talk about job stress issues and burnout and stuff like that, usually the first thing that comes up is workload, you know, and that's certainly a factor, but it's not necessarily the major one. And so when you look at what are not just the sort of physical demands, but a lot of the psychological and social issues, and a better fit, in terms of I'm working in a place that encourages me to thrive and grow and whatever, that those are more important. And so for the values, that for some people is the absolute most critical thing. I mean, they can take a lot of other stuff with the work, but if you're in a place where there's a value conflict, or you're being asked to do things that you think are not right, or are ethically challenging, in some way, or difficult to recover from because of that. People just say, I mean, the common phrase I would get in interviews would be soul erosion. So it's, the erosion of my soul. I can't look at the mirror in the morning and before I leave and say, this is what I'm going to go out to do. And it's kind of like, I don't want to sell my soul. More money, will you stay? No, I've got to go and be in a better place, for me to do the kind of work that I do.
So I know you're a researcher first. I mean, I think that's how I'd describe you. I don't know how you can tell me how you would describe yourself, but when it comes to your expertise on burnout, do you ever find yourself in a consulting sort of role, and have you moved into that? Because I could see some people who are in those situations saying, listen, I just need help to understand what's going on. I know we have a lot of great counselors and therapists out there who can help out with some of those things, but where's that line for you?
Well, it's an interesting question, because in some ways, since I've retired, officially from commuting to Berkeley and teaching classes and all, and doing new studies and all that kind of thing, my focus has really been on how do we best translate what we have learned, from all of this work into actual practical, helpful things that will make society a little bit better, as best we can. And so it's not enough just to do the research, get the data, put it out there in a journal where not a lot of people will get access to it or understand it or be able to figure out, oh, because of this, then I should do that. So, in a sense, I wouldn't say a consultant exactly is the right word. I'm not really sure what it is, but it's a consulting, advocate, teacher, advisor. I'm not mentor. Guru. Okay, guru.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Where I'm trying to find as many ways as possible to kind of spread the word about what we think we know and why, and then see, if there's some way to actually get some of this put into practice to make a difference. So, so that's really, I think, all the work that I've done over the years of my career. I mean, as a teacher and as a researcher, and and then as an administrator, and then obviously an advisor to graduate students and so forth. All of those skills still come together, but trying to figure out better venues to publicize and or to work with groups or organizations on what do we do about this. And of course, that's why you publish a book. And in this case, it's a book that's not meant for, a professional journal kind of thing. It's really meant to be for the general public, and hopefully everybody can be on the same page with the same language on this, so we can kind of get a better approach to job burnout, because I think a lot of it out there is actually incorrect. I understand why people go there, but it doesn't lead you to solutions. It leads to blaming the victim, which is not helpful at all. What's wrong with you? Why can't you take it? Kind of thing. And I think that's why the word and the term and everything is sort of resonating now in the wake of the pandemic, in the wake of other kind of changes to the workplace and expectations. And we're seeing, people wanting to reach out, and I'm just trying to figure out how can I be as effective as I can, in translating what we actually do know and what could be better solutions.
Can you state the name of the book that you just published and who the publisher is?
Yes. The book is, I will even pick it up. Hopefully this will show up. But at any rate, it's The Burnout Challenge. And the subtitle of that is Managing People's Relationships with Their Jobs. So the whole notion of the person and the job, and sort of the fit, the match, not perfect, but better, is really what's at the heart of that. And it's published by Harvard University Press. And they were the editor there was the one who actually contacted me just as we were going into the pandemic, I think, just before, saying, could you write a book about burnout? Now, I've written books about burnout before.
Yes, you have.
This was a new kind of thing. And we're thinking we're at a better place in terms of what we've learned in the past decades before that, since the last one. And let's try and pull that together. And did it for, we're sitting around sheltering in place, what better thing to do than write a book? But it took a while, and it took feedback from the editor, as well, to kind of say what would be a better shape and a better way to pull it together. So it came out last fall, 2022, and it's gotten some incredible reviews. It was the top 10 in, get this, business economic books for 2022. Doesn't mention psychology, business economics, kind of thing. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. And maybe I'm getting there to communicate a little bit better, with people, in different areas and different walks of life who might actually be able to respond to this. So it was getting great reviews from, all kinds of different publishers weekly. And it was just great. And that has been not just that kind of recognition, but people who send me emails or things, or come up and, when I'm at a meeting or something and saying, I've read your book, you know what? It really, helped me understand this better than I had before. And I just want to say thank you. And that's been so gratifying. I mean, that's like, when you're teaching psychology classes all these years, and then you run into somebody who said, I was in your class in 1983, and I just want you to know that, and then you go on, you say, wow, look what they've done, and you helped plant a little seed, which is so great, to see what they've done. And, and then they've kind of, taken this knowledge and run with it. So to get that feedback that, they've heard various messages, they understand it, they've been able to translate it into their situation, and it's given them some new insights or a better way of coping, or we're bringing this up at our staff meeting because, that kind of thing. And so, I mean, in teaching how gratifying that is to hear what your students actually can do when they leave and go on. And in some cases, it's been from people that I never actually knew as a student. I mean, Jane, you probably know this, I'm sure. But, you have classes, sometimes 500, 400, students. They don't all come to office hours. They don't always come up and talk with you afterwards or whatever. But in the most unlikely places, sometimes I'll be there and somebody comes up and say, Dr. Maslach, you probably don't remember me, but I was in your Psych 1 class, or I was in your social psych class, and then they'll tell something about that class that really stuck with them. And thinking, wow, that's great to hear. Well,
it's not surprising to me that your book has been so well received right now. I know Jane and I were just talking to Todd Rose, who is former Harvard faculty who started a think tank called Populous, and they did a study. I've really been looking at your stuff in the last few years, and they did a study called the American Workforce Index, and it really showed how values are changing in our. And I love the subtitle of your book, about the relationship with us and our jobs. It's such a good way. I think people think about job as just something I do. I love thinking about it as a relationship when you're spending that much time with something.
Yes.
You want a healthy relationship with that thing. Anyway, what Todd's group found, though, in the shifting of people's values was right back to burnout research. Like, what people are coming back to, they almost know now, I would say even intuitively, that some of the things that they've been doing for their jobs has not been healthy for them. And so they're kind of revolting against that. One of the other stats that I saw is that we've got people changing the the number of people changing jobs over the pandemic in the last couple of years was larger than any other time in American history. So again, I go back to by the way, I saw your book in fall of 2022. I was in an airport and your book was in the airport bookstore. Did you know?
Yes, I did know that. I even took a picture once because I took a picture too. There it is.
I just want to point out that during the pandemic, most people were learning how to bake sourdough bread. They weren't writing books. So it's pretty impressive that you were able to organize your energies in that way. But that leads me to the question of whether you personally have ever been experiencing burnout, or has this been an observer phenomenon for you?
I think it's been much more an observer phenomenon, and one, and two, learning from what you have learned. So in other words, it's like following the data. And if I'm saying or seeing this is what people are saying about what the problems are and all this kind of stuff, and then say, and, you know, sometimes in the interviews, people are saying, here's what I do to cope more successfully. I mean, I'm interviewing people who have not burned out or overcome burnout or, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like saying, okay, I should be applying this, practicing what I preach, you know, here on the data. And so, but I think the first time I actually came across it, and there wasn't the term burnout for a long time, but was when I was in college and I was doing volunteer work. And this was volunteer work in a neighboring community that had a lot of low income families. And this was a particular housing project. And I was working with a group of young girls who were about 10 or 11 years old. And once a week, I'd be able to be with them and we'd talk about things, and I'd take them out on trips, or I'd find out, you know, what are some of the kind of the issues. You know, it was kind of like a safe place where they could, you know, get into things with me. And there was a psychiatric social worker who was my supervisor, you know, for this. And I learned from him a lot about what that kind of work and, you know, social work and dealing with troubled people, poor people who couldn't afford the basics, you know, and what would play out and how you handled that job and yourself and whatever. And I remember when I first started publishing, you know, an article, which was a popular article, actually, because I couldn't get it published in a journal. And I wrote about what I was learning from interviews on burnout. And I got a phone call from my old supervisor saying, all right, you know, kind of thing. And remember when we just had this amazing time. And I realized that he had opened my eyes to a lot of things about doing work with people. And at that point, I was focusing more on people in human service, healthcare, you know, all social services, all kinds of things like ministers, all this kind of thing. So I was thinking at the time, gee, these are the people who are talking about this thing called burnout. And maybe there's something about those personal relationships, which are also professional relationships, which can also be hard and difficult as well as meaningful and, you know, et cetera. So, so that probably is way back when I first got some inkling about that. And I think I also, from his mentoring as well, his teaching, but also his mentoring, made it clear how you have to take care of yourself as well as you're going through whatever you're going through, you know, not just in this case, the social work, but, you know, how to pay attention to what's going on with yourself and how to reach out and get the support you need, or, you know, do the kind of things that would help. So, yeah. So I owe him a lot. Thanks, Tom.
Your new book. So, I haven't had the chance to read it yet. But I did look through it, and because what I was looking for compared to your old book, I wanted to know who this was written for. Because and I saw that it was more of a general audience, and I think you confirmed that here today. And I wanted to see if your theory had changed over time since last time you kind of wrote about it in a book. And what I saw is that the general theory of burnout it really it hadn't changed, which must feel pretty good. Or maybe I'm wrong, but from looking at it, that you probably have a lot more data, maybe a lot more nuance, and maybe your understanding about it. But the general framework of your theory has held up pretty well. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I would say that's true. That in terms of what we're finding, and it is in accord with a lot of other data that people in, occupational health psychology have been gathering for decades. I mean, a lot of what I have in there, in some sense, is not new. It's a different way maybe of talking about it. It's extended it in some way to say it's not just about the fit between the job and the physical body of the human being. Like, we design better chairs so you don't have back problems. We design better, computer workstations so you don't blow your hands out and wrists with carpal tunnel. All of those if we can fit the job physically better, and design it for how the body actually operates, rather than some other abstract design, it will be better in terms of physical well-being. And so, that's not a new idea, but what's new for us, and this is what we're finding in the research, is that if you extend that to a better fit in terms of the social and psychological fit, in other words, what makes people tick, what makes them motivated, what makes them willing to help other people, what makes them, try and be creative and do something, all of those kind of things. And we know already, there are core psychological needs that all people have for their entire lives, not just at work, but at home, in the neighborhood, the community, whatever. And so, there are things about autonomy, about belongingness, about competence, psychological safety, fairness, meaning, purpose. All of these kind of things are something that we know are true about how people function, and we should be thinking about what is a better kind of match between those kinds of things that people bring to the workplace in terms of their human needs as well as their physical body, and how do we create a better match so that actually helps that thrive and grow, and keeps people motivated and take pride in their work and, willing to do, extra things if they need to, but because they want to, and not just, okay, you got to stay more hours. You got to come in on the weekend and work overtime. Sorry, I may not be able to pay you, but you got to be here, kind of thing, which is more this culture of fear that's sort of developed in recent years.
It seems to me like, HR departments and IO psychologists all over the world should be taking your book and really applying it to their workplaces, because I just, I think, now I'm not an IO psychologist. I know a couple of them, but I've taught the course and in an introductory way. And so much of it is the other side of psychology and what we bring in terms of measurement, in terms of applying, research. And I guess there is some intrinsic motivation, or there's a lot of overlap, but this burnout research just seems so important. The things you're talking about in regards to like purpose and alignment of myself and my workplace. I think that, and I love that you talked about the way that we've taken care of people's bodies in the workplace and their physical well-being. I think that there is just such an opportunity right now with a lot of people who are, again, leaving jobs. And I always tell people when I talk about this, I said, don't leave your job too quickly because the grass might not be greener on the other side. But maybe, and here's a question I'd pose to you. Am I lying? Is that good advice? Can people in a job where they are not feeling very aligned in terms of, I think there's maybe 6 areas of burnout or related to burnout.
6.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they're not feeling aligned in those areas, can they change things within themselves, or do they have any control over what they're doing? Or does the environment, does the workplace need to change for them?
The latter. The workplace needs to change. And that's basically, what you've tapped into is what I think is one of the basic, how can I say this? It's not just misunderstanding, but it's a not a good way of framing the whole issue, which is always, I think, too much. It's not to say it's not important, but it's too much on the individual person. What is wrong with you? What can you do to change things, et cetera, without taking into account the other part of the equation, which is what is the social environment in which you're doing these things? And it's both. It's not, either or, is it the boss or is it the worker or is it the, what kind of, and that's why we talk about this match, a better match between the people and the work environment. So it often means that it's not just a me problem, it's a we problem, because it's like if not just me, feeling bad about, the kind of demands that are placed or the fact that we don't get recognized for what we do or, all of this kind of thing. If it's not just me, it's a lot of us feeling like that. Yeah. Then we've got a different kind of focus. It's like, what's going on here that is, these pebbles in our shoe that we just can't get rid of, and are the chronic job stressors. And I like the phrase pebbles in your shoe because it gives a sense of scale. It's not, reinventing healthcare, reinventing, whatever for the 21st century. It's the chronic everyday things that wear you down that are causing, what people talk about as burnout. So chronic job stressors is an important point in all of this, because we know from all the stress coping research, people do not recover as well from chronic stressors as they do from acute stressors, which are occasional, temporary, more clearly bounded with a beginning and an end, that kind of thing. All hands on deck because we've got this emergency, then it's over. Okay. And then we go back to normal. But with chronic, it's there all the time or most of the time, and no matter what you do, it's still there when you come back to it, So that's an important point. And then the other important point I would say, and I have to thank World Health Organization for this, because when they made a pronouncement about job burnout is a legitimate occupational phenomenon in 2019. They pointed out that it's from chronic, response, it's a stress response. Okay, that's a normal response. But what they pointed out is that it's to chronic job stressors that have not been successfully managed, which means they could be. There's an optimistic note there. It says they could be better managed. And of course, people are saying, well, who should do it to manage it? Well, everybody, you could try and manage it yourself. You can try and get together with your colleagues in your team. You can work with your manager, supervisor on terms of your unit. Could we do something different about how we do intake or how we, It could be the CEOs, the C-suite people. It could be all of the above. But the point is that the deep roots are in management issues, which is really about that intersection of the job and people. And if they could be better managed, then they wouldn't have such chronic job stressors. They'd be less frequent, or we'd have better ways to recover from them, or we get rid of them altogether, or, whatever. But the point is that can be changed. And usually it takes more people working together to change it. Because if I want to change my job schedule and say, oh, you know what? I need to actually come in earlier and leave earlier because the work hours here don't match the school hours of my kids, and that's where I have a lot of, problem. Well, if I come in earlier and leave earlier, I might be leaving other people in the lurch, because I'm not there or I'm there when they're not. So it really becomes more of a shared kind of thing. How do we make it a little better around here for the kind of work that we're doing so that we can do it well, we can get it done on time without knocking ourselves out, we can recover well, come back, do it again tomorrow, and we're going to feel good about the work and enjoy the work and feel proud of the work and, all of those kinds of things. So it entails, when you start looking at the environment as well as the individual within that environment. There's a lot of reasons, and we talk about it in the book, from psychology, we know how we focus on the person and not, the situation so much. Well, this is another example of that. And so the problem then becomes that people keep saying, what is wrong with the person? We have to diagnose who has this thing, this disease, this illness, which it's not. And how do we fix that person, and how do we get them, better coping skills, or we get, they take time off from the job, or maybe they just shouldn't be working here and they should be let go. There's all kinds of things of, you fix the person. But if you're not also fixing what's causing people to experience this, you're not really fixing the problem. And so we're arguing for, if we think of it in terms of a match between people and the job, we're trying to say it's a both and it can be successfully better managed. And there are ways to look at things within those 6 areas that will actually, that are fixable, that are changeable, that, you get people on the same page to say, let's do this, let's redesign that. Let's get, we're great at putting things and adding things to people's plates at work. We are terrible at subtracting. And you've really got to subtract. If, we're going to do more. That whole phrase, I'm sure you've heard, it's I think of it now as the burnout mantra. You're going to have to do more with less. I'm sorry. This is not, human beings at some point can't keep just upping the ante and doing more, et cetera. And so we really, really, and just back to sorry to go on a little bit, but back to that other point is that a lot of people, in thinking about this as an illness, or a disease or some sort of medical health condition, are missing the point that a stress response is a normal, healthy thing. Thank God we have it when we've got threats, when we've got challenges, kind of thing. That, our body, our mind, everything gets in gear to deal with it. And then you recover from it and come back. And so, it shouldn't be, pathologized as, ooh, burnout is this illness. And now we've got to diagnose people with it and treat them, with medication, or they should see a psychiatrist, or they should, whatever. Now, it's not to say some of that might be part of coping, but the burnout experience is not the pathology. Does it have health consequences down the road? It could. It could lead to severe depression. It could lead to other kind of health issues. Yes, it has health consequences, and that's what World Health Organization pointed out. But it's not in and of itself a health pathology, and we should not be thinking of it as that way. So for me, the bottom line is, rather than spending all that time trying to say, how do we find out who is burning out? The more important question is, how do we find out why people are burning out? And when we do that, then we're really looking at people and the conditions under which they're doing whatever they're doing, and get a better perspective on how we could tackle this problem in various ways that make more sense to actually solve the problem than simply pointing the finger, which is always the thing. What's wrong with you?
I'd love to know how this framework may have influenced your decisions as an administrator in higher education. To what extent did that become a driving force of how you navigated the challenges that I'm sure you had a challenge or two? And
yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it was a driving force, but I think you get to the point where what you have learned from whatever you've done, in this case, from that research, becomes just a part of the way you move forward in life, and it connects with other things that, have been part of your growing up, for example. But one of the things that happened while I was in administration is that I was sort of creating a new unit, or I didn't create it, but I was asked to oversee it, that really focused on undergraduate education and teaching and learning. And so it was a number of disparate kinds of units that were coming together under, sort of one focus. And part of that was the very early stages of educational technology. And at that point, it was not really well managed or run or understood. People were saying, oh my gosh, I want to get a website. This sounds great for my class. Who do I call? And they would call up people who had technical skills, but had lousy people skills, for example. And it just like, this wasn't, going well, whatever. And what I was finding, for example, when people would say, well, I don't know about, this guy, if maybe we can't really keep him. People complain about him all the time. And, so I found out about him and looked at the job and realized his skills were in a very different place than what he was being asked to do. So he was, he did not, English was his second language. He was a brilliant designer. People loved the work he did, but he did not work well with them when they're yelling on the phone, and I need this tomorrow, and I, kind of, thing. And so it was like, let us move, if you value what he can do, and he does do brilliant work, let's get him out of this place and let's put him over in that place. And we set up a process by which departments, or individual professors or whatever could come and, hire him to work on a particular thing. And so he then did amazing work for the university. He loved it. He became like a little folk hero. He was so good, from starting off with this thing where, people were yelling and screaming, he's not done what I've told him to do, and da-da-da-da. And so again, it was for me realizing that there was a bad fit there. This isn't the person that you needed to be on with the guys who were rude and abusive, and teach, dealing with staff. You needed somebody else who could work or intervene or something like that. But this guy, his talents lay elsewhere, and that was why you hired him. Let him be in a place where, in fact, he can just go and, hit the ground running. So there were lots of incidents like that where we could kind of rethink, and then as a result of that, reconfigure what this educational technology thing looked like at Berkeley and change it to a point that it actually became a very successful thing. It became, then I had a whole unit. We got in people to manage it. We had, a whole different way of working with faculty and departments around teaching. And, it just accomplished great things. But part of it was making it clear, not only what are we trying to do, but who and what kind of skills, what kind of people and what kind of skills and talents do they have, and how do we best use them so that they can thrive, rather than, get squashed down and beaten down by that.
Such an important principle to help people function from their strengths. So I think it's a really great example.
Yeah. Whereas the other thing was, well, if he's not doing well, we'll just have to let him go. And it turned out, you say, this guy, he's doing great stuff if he can be in a place where he's not being hammered by people that he, with deadlines and unrealistic expectations and,
it's such a bad deal. It's such a bad deal for organizations and for individuals if they can't figure out fit for people, because turnover is not great for organizations, right?
No, not at
very
all.
Very expensive. And healthy organizations and getting people into places where their skills and strengths can flourish. Is wonderful. I just hear so much. Jane, I know you teach a positive psych class. I think the application of this burnout stuff is just, there's so much positive psychology, humanistic psychology in it. Christina, do you agree with that? Does it validate some of those theories?
Yeah, I think so. I think one problem that still exists, and this is what we always have to be careful of, is that the tendency to focus on the problem in terms of each individual, rather than having also a shared social perspective, is embedded in a lot of other practices which keep it going. So, for example, one of the things that I learned in administrator was performance reviews, which are individual. And it's each person, and it's maybe once a year, as it's kind of like, how helpful is this? And it's usually not getting you set up to thrive and do better, but what hasn't happened is more like a report card sometimes. And but it's still framing the issue as, well, we have to do a better job at performance reviews. And I'm saying that's not the way to think about this, because you're then missing what are the other things in that environment that need to be, changed in a different way or reviewed and modified in a different way, that when you only focus on the individual side of that equation, you just come up with individual answers, and you don't come up with the system answers or the organizational design answers or the, work policy thing. I mean, I'll give you another example from my administration. I also had to oversee the campus advising unit for lower division students before they got into a major, and then had an advisor, in psychology or economics or whatever. One of the things when I was going down to sort of look at, get a better sense of what they were doing on the job and the advisors, is that students would come in, and the student evaluations of this unit were not great always. So, but then you come in and there's just a wall full of these little, wooden box things with tons of forms, white paper. And what you have to do is you have to be able to find what is the paper that goes with your problem, the intake paper, and fill that out to go in. And then they know, to send you to so-and-so in room B, over there. And, life changes, the world changes and evolves. And so there are more papers being added because now there are new issues that came up that didn't exist before or weren't being brought to the advisor before. And it was getting impossible to just sort of track and understand all of this. And so people were saying, well, maybe we need to color code it, have blue paper and pink paper and, kind of thing. And it, as we talked about and went through it, the solution became, we need to redesign the basic form. We're just adding another one, and redesign the basic process so that you didn't have to go through it this way. There could be, could you streamline it? Could you get rid of some things? Could you come up with a really better way of identifying what is this, 3 key points that, we'll get it slotted into the right advisor or something like that. And so, it's one of the things that I learned is that you've got to look at what are the frustrating points, what are the chronic stressors, what are those pebbles in your shoe, that just sort of drive you crazy and are always obstacles. And, you're spending more time trying to figure out the logistics here than being with the student or with your patient or, whatever. So some of that stuff is not particularly, glamorous, sexy, stressor kinds of things. It's like ordinary pebbles in the shoe. But you know what? That's the chronic stuff that can take away from your feeling you're doing a good job, from the stuff you enjoy most about it, from the fact that it's always there to haunt you no matter what. And so in the book, by the way, I should mention that we have a lot of examples from different organizations or different groups, talking about and telling us what they did that made a difference. And actually, some of it is inexpensive, not that difficult to do, but you just have to have a mindset of saying, yeah, we could do better. So for example, I'll just give you one. We were working with an organization to get longitudinal data. So we wanted to be able to come in once, come back later, et cetera. So we had to work out how we're going to do this. And this was an organization that had a number of different kinds of units. And it was somewhere in the 800 to 1,000 people. And we asked the CEO at the outset, okay, of those, we're going to assess these 6 areas as well as other things. Any thoughts about what people are going to say about workload, control, reward, workplace community, fairness, and values? Those are the 6. And he said, oh, well, it's going to be workload because everybody complains they're working too hard. And let's see, it'll probably be reward because everybody thinks they're not getting paid enough. We did the process. We did it in a way to get the majority, we got over 800, so it was like 80% of people to fill out the forms. And lo and behold, workload was not a big negative issue. Reward was not a big negative issue. What was a big one? Fairness. And the guy was shocked. What? How people think that they're working in an unfair play. I mean, how could that be? Da, 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 And so we were going back through the data, because looking at it overall as well as, different units. And we pointed out to him that there were different issues in different places that people talked about, but there was one kind of universal thing that everybody really hated. And I remember when interviewing people, you could almost see venom dripping, kind of thing. And it was that Distinguished Service Award, which they hated. And you're thinking, really? This is an award for, going above and beyond, doing something really special. And it came with an extra little check, of money. So you got some, payment for that. And he couldn't understand it. He was saying, they don't like that service. I mean, maybe we need to put more money in it. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more of a, hefty award. And I said, it didn't pop up as a reward issue. It popped up as a fairness issue. They all felt this went to the wrong people. The system was rigged. The people who really deserved recognition weren't getting that award. And the people who didn't really do any special work, but maybe had the favor of the boss or, were the leader of the team, but not the team that did the work. I mean, there was 50 ways this thing was unfair, kind of thing. And he like, whoa, I have to say to him, he say, well, I didn't realize, I didn't understand that. We've got to fix it. And everybody's saying, you've got to fix it. You're the CEO. And he said, I didn't catch it. I didn't understand it. You are going to have to help and work with me to figure out how we're going to fix this. And so they set up a thing that got, reps from different groups and, people who felt comfortable with their, thing. They worked to design a better recognition award for people who did great things. And it took a while because it's not easy. And you have to say, oh, that led to that problem before. So we have to do something a little different, whatever. They finally got a new system which they said, this would be the way we are going to recognize great service. The company said, yeah, let's go for it. And when we came back to do our follow-up, that fairness issue was no longer there because they had, in fact, gotten together to fix and come up with a better way to recognize people who did something really special.
That's such a good story. I think about your performance reviews too. And I don't know if you started asking different questions, like asking people what is working for you around here and what's not working for you around here. But that is such a can of worms, it seems to me, for an administrator or a boss to ask their employees. I know it's the best way forward for all the reasons you just gave in that story, but it's also kind of scary, isn't it, to ask?
Well, okay, but here's a difference. If you're asking an individual during a performance review, I mean, you, the employee, are going to be worried. How is this going to sound? Is this going to be a negative, like I'm whining and complaining or something like that? We did this in the research. It was an anonymous thing. We worked really hard to make sure that it was confidential, anonymous. People could feel comfortable. It was not going to go into some computer thing to the boss's office or whatever. And so we were able to get a lot more of these kind of things. And a lot of people said, this thing here, this award is really, awful. The other thing I want to say is when we went back and talked with people, there were a number of people in the interviews who said, I didn't actually answer your survey 2 years ago when we first did this, but I saw what happened and we actually fixed something that was not working well. So now I'm putting in my 2 cents worth, kind of thing. But the other thing that happened for me in this particular thing, what was really good, and again, I credit the CEO for realizing it and acting on it, is that it built the fact that they took something, a pebble in the shoe, this unfair award that just goes to the wrong people and doesn't recognize the people who really do something special. The fact that we could fix it. Well, if we could fix that, we could fix that over there. It built optimism. It built hope, and people talked about it like it told us we could do a better job. We could get a better, we make things better around here. And the CEO actually then institutionalized it in the sense of that I can't remember if it was every year or every 2 years, but I think it was every year. They had a session in which they did an assessment like we did for them. And it's called, the employees named it Let's Hear It. And so Let's Hear It. And each year they do this, they're coming up with, okay, what's working well? What's not working so well? Is there something we could, tackle and try and improve in some way? And we know we could do it because we just did with the thing that we all hated. So we could do more. And it built we found, for example, that all of the 6 areas when we did the longitudinal follow-up got more positive. Not just fairness, which was a big shift from negative to positive, but the workplace community was more positive because people were working across different, organizational units to figure out a better solution. They got to meet people. They got to, share things and do things together. They felt there was, better recognition. They had a sense of control. We can actually do something that would make it better. We're not, so I think if you make it a more we process rather than a me process, to get back to that, instead of asking the question in performance reviews, is there a way that it could be raised as a regular agenda item every month or every quarter? How are things going around here? What's not working so well? What could be improved? And get some ideas and suggestions of what that might look like, rather than imposing something from top down without getting any feedback from bottom up and sideways. Is this going to make a difference? And should we do this? And I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed over the years who are demoralized, really demoralized by, I am trained, I'm an engineer, I know how to do this work, and I never, ever, ever get asked for any input, any feedback on how could we do this a little bit better, or how might we manage this a little better, or something like that. I'm just told what to do. And sometimes, maybe there's some good things, but then other things, there's other problems. But I'm not valued. I'm not heard. I don't have a really sort of good relationship with this whole job. And so all of the, improvements in those 6 areas can all have a way of making that a better place. So if you think of the concept of a continuous improvement, which is making little changes over time to sort of, that it should be such a normal idea, that things, as it's still working, could we do better? But the world changes. We saw that with the pandemic, right? The jobs had to change. Some jobs had to change dramatically, and we had to figure it out on the fly. And some were good, and some were not such good solutions. And we can learn from all of that. But I think back, over 50 years ago when I started teaching at Berkeley. Teaching was a different process, and the way I taught was not the way I was teaching 20 years later or 30 years later, because we've learned more things about how people learn and better techniques of teaching. And there's technology that we didn't have. So you adapt to an evolving, changing world, and it will change again. It will always will. So it's never one solution, then we're done. It's usually, okay, now what are we running into given this kind of issue? And maybe there's a way that we could better handle that so it doesn't take so much time or effort, or it's an unnecessary waste, of time, but make us feel better about the quality of the work we're doing. And so
I'm gonna ask one more burnout question, and then I'm really sorry that I knew I was going to ask a lot about burnout today.
Okay.
A lot of times we get into people's histories. And so I think someday I'd like to have you back for a part 2 to just hear your story, your developmentally, like where you came from and where you got your degree and all that backstory, which is really, really fascinating to our listeners. But that engineer who comes to you and says, listen, they don't listen to my ideas. Those people who are having those pebbles in their shoe, even now they're listening to this and thinking, I didn't know what that was, but I think that's just chronic job stress. When their environment won't change, like they don't have any power in their environment, what what is the suggestion for a person who finds themselves in a situation where they realize I am on the path to burnout? There's pebbles in the shoe. and I don't feel like I can change the system.
Yeah. Well, people probably can't change the system on their own. They can probably change things about how I live the rest of my life, how I fit work in, how I use my other time, my personal time, my sleep time to best effect to cope, etc. But changing the environment is usually going to be more of a social, collaborative, kind of process. And so there you need to seek out, are there other people like me? Can I talk to my colleagues and just sort of say, has anybody ever thought we could do X, a little differently, or, get a better sense of, is it just me and I'm just really in the wrong place, or are there other people that I could work with? Some of the solutions are ones people just do on their own, under the radar of any kind of administration. I remember one medical team, in a health clinic, talk about how they changed their morning huddle. When they came in, there's a morning huddle to sort of say, okay, who are our patients and who's coming in and who's going, Physician basically speaks, nobody else does, and they're just going for the day. And by chance, one day, one of the junior nurses who had never spoken up said, I hate to read this, but my child is really, really sick. I only have childcare for the morning. Is there any way that I can go home early? And she was just beside herself and scared, but figured she had to do something. And the team said, oh, of course. Well, we can do this, that, you can, yeah. And made a solution, and she went home. And then they realized it was not just a one-off. This is something they should be doing in general. So they changed it to what they called a cuddle huddle, where in another minute or so, we do a check on how everybody's doing and what's happening. And is there anything you've noticed with some of the patients that we maybe need to pay attention to? So people began to speak up, not just about themselves, but about, I've really been kind of worried about Mrs. Jones. I'm not really sure that we're helping her by doing X or Y. And it said it transformed their whole initial way of going in and doing the job's work, because they got to know each other better. They checked in on how they were doing. They figured out ways to make changes. They encouraged people to, speak up and be part of all of this. And they wrote to me saying, we love what's happened because of this, and it should be something. And they didn't need permission to do that. They didn't need money to do that, but they figured out a way. But it was a social kind of, thing. It took a lot of them as sort of partnering together, and this was their particular unit. So that can be applied in different, sort of ways. But the other thing is, if you really think that you're stuck and it's not going to change and you don't have control and whatever, then one of the things is to say, and where could I go where it would be better? Because you could quit your job and go and get another one, and it's not helping you because you've just gone from one frying pan into another one, on the fire. And this is not. So being more aware of what some of those 6 areas might be. I'll tell you another little story, just is that I used to go over and give a talk to graduate students who had formed a student organization in the hard sciences about stress issues and burnout and stuff in their work in the labs and things like that. So I had done it once, and then a couple of years later, go back again. So, chemistry, biology, physics, etc. And the last time, well, not the last time, but one of the times I did it, a woman came up afterwards and said, Dr. Maslach, I came and heard your talk about burnout 4 years ago. And so I was wondering, so why are you coming up talking to me now, kind of thing. And she said, I just want to let you know that at that time, I was a first-year student. I was in my dream lab doing the kind of work that I thought I'd always wanted to be a scientist. And this was, like I thought really good. And it turned out, instead of my dream job, it turned out to be hell. It was just everything. And as you were talking, I was going down the list. Workload. Oh yeah, that's a bad one. How much control? Yeah, no control at all. Reward recognition, and she was just going, all 6 of them were really negative for me. And all of a sudden, this light bulb went off in my head. It said, it's not me, it's the job, it's the lab. And I have got to get into another lab. Now, this is not easy for a graduate student to leave one lab and go into another, but she persisted and she got advisors to help. And eventually she got transferred to work in another lab. What hadn't been the dream one she had thought of, but she had come to tell me that the different lab was perfect. I've thrived. I'm doing good work. I've been involved in several studies. I've got my name on several publications. And Dr. Maslach, I want to tell you, I've now gotten some job interviews. And so she recognized that I am really, really in all ways in the wrong place. And rather than saying, which she had been doing, what's wrong with me? I have to give up my dream of being a scientist. Maybe I've been deluding myself. I'm not really good at this kind of work, etc. She realized there was so much that was wrong about the situation that was just not a good fit at all with the professor, the senior grad students, everything, that getting into a different environment, a different lab where she did other kind of research turned out to be great, and she thrived and she did well. And now she was on a path to, getting a job at, some university or college or something, where she would do more research and teach, etc. So that's the kind of, thing you can do by yourself in terms of assessing the 6 areas and what's working well and what's not. And are there ways you can make a better fit, either by things you do differently or getting other people to, try and change some of those job conditions or the work conditions. And if it's really as bad as like it was for her, but she made the right, conclusion. It's not about me, the individual. The match is not a good one. I've got to get to a place that's better for me to be a scientist and do research.
I really resonate with that example because as you were describing it, it seemed like that was the process that I went through. And there's something I think very powerful, maybe even magical about the framework that you've developed, and perhaps the clarity with which you present it, that you can reach into people's lives and just unlock things. And so I'm not surprised at all that you have this constant parade of people saying, you remember me from 10 years ago?
Right.
You did X, Y, and Z, and you may not remember everyone, but it's an amazing talent. And I think you're to be congratulated on that capacity to reach into people's lives and make such a practical change.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. But you know what I attribute a good chunk of that to is learning how to teach. And not only that, but being in a field where I developed of social psychology, which meant that from the beginning, we are thinking of what is the situation surrounding the person. It's psychology, the individual, how they're thinking, how they're relating to people, choices they're making, but it's not within, it's without, and it's relationship too. And so I think that framework. And then as I got into health psychology, it was clear that a lot of things, make a difference when we look at it as more of a we thing and, epidemic conditions that are affecting lots of people. It's not just the individual. Organizational psychology, of course. And my background as an undergraduate was within a major at Harvard called social relations, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. But it was basically a social sciences major. So I had social anthropology and cultural anthropology. I had sociology. I had social, psychology, and it was an amazing education, I think, and probably shaped a lot of my, not just thinking, but also what I'm noticing and what I'm paying attention to. And so I think that's another piece in the puzzle that just led me to realize that. And I like your analogy of unlocking it, because I can't tell you how often, even when I've done, podcasts or, other kinds of things or given talks, people will often say, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about it that way. And it's kind of like, that's the aha light bulb moment that we're hoping for. Think about it differently. See if that actually helps you better understand it. It's not guaranteed, but it's another way of thinking about it, looking at it, asking questions about it. So the why question, why is this happening, is really, I mean, I tell people now, because they'll often come from organizations and say, oh, well, we're using your research measure, your MBI, on our people, and every year they have to fill it out. And I'm thinking, yeah, and you're misusing it because A, they often don't respect confidentiality. B, in many cases, they don't respond ever. They never talk back to the employees who filled it out, which is research ethic number one. If you've contributed, you deserve an answer and a reply. So after a while, people say, why am I filling out these surveys and giving answers? Because nobody's paying attention to it. But they're all focusing on, we've got to find out who's burned out. And I now refer to a Gallup poll that was down last year in 2022. And Gallup has really focused a lot on engagement with work, and which is sort of the opposite of burnout. Have measures of, and then they have a business of, having measures of engagement. And it always comes out about 30%. It used to come out about 30% of people were reported being engaged with their work, which I always thought that's nothing to really applaud and get happy about. 30%? Okay. And people in the organizations would say, we keep using this measure, but the needle doesn't move, well, what are you doing? Kind of thing. But the poll last year was a global poll in many countries. And what they reported was, and obviously pandemic has occurred in the meantime, that number had dropped to about 21% of workers worldwide reported that they were engaged with work, which means that 80% of the workforce is less than thrilled with their job. And so for me, it's like the question is, how could we make things better around here rather than who can we find who's having burnout? What do we do about them? How can we make things better around here? Because a rising tide is going to lift all boats. And if you've got 80%, they may not be the more extreme cases of burnout, but they're not in great place either. And they may be really cynical about the work. They may be really just exhausted and overwhelmed. But I mean, let's focus on how do we make a better place that sort of encourages, people to thrive. Just like, if we're going to have out my deck, have plants grow, I have to have the right kind of pot and soil and sunlight and water in different proportions for different plants, maybe, but still you need some basics for those to grow and be beautiful and, spawn new ones and all that kind of thing. So, that's why at some level, I think the focus on just the individual alone is misguided, because it doesn't lead people to think differently, to ask different questions. And it's not to say that, coping individually is not important. It is, but it's not the only thing. Just saying, be resilient, be strong, be tough, keep up with it. I mean, we're doing more with less. So, just plug in and go. And I just don't think that's the best answer. I mean, it's what is that phrase I think I used once? It's an American one. My European colleagues and other colleagues tease me about it, but it's, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. And basically it's saying, if there's a gap, if there's a mismatch between the kitchen, the restaurant, and you, then you have to make up the difference. It's up to you to figure out how to do it. We're not going to change. And I think what we've learned from a lot of the burnout research is, the kitchen can be not so hot. It could have better ventilation. It could, have a better environment in terms of how people work. I mean, so that notion, that mantra that everybody's been hearing about, the job is what it is, which means it's not going to change. Any change has to be you. I hope in the pandemic that bit the dust, because the jobs had to change. I mean, sorry, they can and they should, and not just because of pandemic. And let's be smart about how the jobs change so that we're actually addressing some of the not well managed chronic stressors. Let's do a better job of managing those and let people thrive and do well.
You make a brilliant case.
Thank you.
Sorry, I stepped on you there, but I did want to say that I am feeling unlocked. But by the way, my internal process right now, I'm just such a fan. This has been an amazing hour for me just to listen to you talk about this.
Oh, good. Yay.
Yeah. No, it is, and it's really helpful. Your point came across really strongly, and as a social psychologist, it's just so fitting that you saw the relationships of the environment to the people, and that you took the pressure off the individual, because people don't need more pressure right now. We need better systems that work, and I think that they work for everybody when we can build them. So I'm inspired. I hope the people listening are. Jane, thanks for making this introduction, and Christina, thank you so much for taking the time. Folks, the book is The Burnout Challenge, and this conversation should make you want to go and pick it up, especially if you are managing people at all in any way. Thank you both for your time. And Christina, maybe we'll bother you in a year or so for a part 2 so we can actually hear about who you are as well.
Okay.
Because there's a personal story worth hearing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
I'd be delighted to be invited back. It's been a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Fantastic.